at it. Ohio State, a 7.5-point favorite in this game. The over-under 47.5. Let's just start where we left the Ohio State-Michigan discussion off, Chris. I thought Ohio State should have opened it up against Michigan. The defensive front is the strength of the defense. Michigan's defense and Tennessee's defense very, very similar. Michigan's defensive front, very strong. They're a little bit vulnerable in the secondary. What do you make of Ohio State and whether or not this is going to be a more aggressive game plan than we saw in that game?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, Ohio State's going to have to pass to set up the run. Like, you're not going to be able to just line up and pound it down Tennessee because Ohio State has tried that in several games this year and it hasn't worked. They tried against Michigan, did not go well. Tennessee is 4th in the country in rushing yards per carry allowed. It's a very good defensive line, as we know. Now, you don't want to let him tee off on Will Howard and throw it 50 times a game, but that offensive game plan against Michigan was just a disaster. And short yardage running when you need to run the ball has not gone well for Ohio State this year. So what is Chip Kelly going to do with a couple of weeks to prepare, 3 weeks to prepare, really, for a Tennessee defense that is really good but also vulnerable in the passing game? They've given up a lot of explosive pass plays. Arkansas had 10, Florida had 7, Georgia had 11. Like, in the pass game, you can get this Tennessee defense. And we know Ohio State has really, really good receivers. The question all year has been, can Will Howard get it to them enough in the big games? And that's been kind of mixed. Penn State, Michigan hasn't really come through. So we'll see what Ohio State wants to do if they want to keep wasting downs by running the ball on 1st and 10.
And I want to get Dame's thoughts on some of this in a second, but I do think it's worth noting James Pierce gets all the love from Tennessee's defensive line, but when I did Coaching Confidential earlier this year ahead of, I think it was the Alabama game, I talked to 2 separate coaches who faced Tennessee who felt like, Amari Thomas in the middle, Bryson Easton as well, they're big-time defensive tackles. Elijah Simmons comes in there as well. He's like 330. That those guys were more impressive to them than James Pierce, who's probably going to be a first-rounder. So the interior of that line, a lot of coaches think is the strength, even though James Pierce has gotten all the headlines. Dame, when you look at those matchups on the outside, I know you took a look at this where, on the offensive side, Tennessee's wide receivers going up against Ohio State on the other side of the ball. What jumped out to you about that matchup?
Well, Ohio State has got a really good secondary. I mean, we're talking about tops in the country. They're led by Caleb Downs, who is an All-American safety, David Igbinosun, who's got 2 picks, 7 pass deflections. I mean, they're a really, really good secondary. And when you look at some of the performances that they had, the matchup against Penn State, where all-world Tyler Warren, he had 4 catches for 47 yards. Then you look at their matchup against Curtis Rourke in a high-powered passing offense in Indiana. He completed, 6 for 16 for 68 yards, I think. So they're really good at eliminating your passing game. They can run with receivers. They can match up size, strength, quickness. Like, they're very, very, very good. And unless you're Oregon, you're not really going to have much of a passing game. And to Tennessee's credit, they don't have any world beaters. I mean, I know Dante Thornton, he's got 647 yards, 6 touchdowns, averaging 25.5 yards per reception, which means he can take the top off the defense. But another part of that is, can Nico get him the ball? So this Tennessee passing offense just hasn't been very efficient. And I think in a game like this, the best way that these receivers can impact an Ohio State team that plays really, really tight man coverage is they've got to block. The running game is going to be super, super important. Like, they've got to get Dylan Sampson going. And when you play against teams who play really tight man-to-man coverage, you can essentially block 2 guys with 1. So take a receiver, you've got a corner lined up against him. He's got eyes locked on his receiver, not paying attention to the quarterback, not paying attention to anything else. Well, then you tell the receiver to go block the safety, and that's basically you're blocking 2 guys with 1 dude. Then you got a back like Dylan Sampson who can get to the second level. Then all of a sudden there's nobody there. There's no secondary support. There's no corner support. There's no safety. Safeties are wondering where the tight ends are. You can move the tight ends around. You can do a lot of different things in the run game against man-to-man coverage to get these guys' eyes off the running backs. So with this Tennessee wide receiver core, they're really I think they should just take the onus on blocking this week. Like, they're not going to put up any all-world numbers against this Ohio State defense. Like, this is just not going to happen. The secondary's too good.
It's an interesting group because you look at them, you watch them. Thornton, big time guy. Brew McCoy, same thing, big time guy. You watch them, you're like, man, like, these guys are NFL speed, NFL bodies. The production hasn't necessarily been there, and Nico Iamaleava, a lot of expectation upon him this year. coming in as a first-year starter. I mean, there's not a lot of guys. I struggle to think of that many guys who came in as a first-year starter with more expectation than he did. And he's been okay, although the numbers haven't been good. The problem has been, when he's been pressured. When he's been pressured this year, 42% completion percentage, 262 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. He's been pressured 100 times this year. That's about the same amount as Carson Beck and Riley Leonard. Sacked 26 times. That's more than any other quarterback in the playoff. But only 10 of those, according to Pro Football Focus, are chalked up to the offensive line. In short, you got to get rid of the ball, not take sacks outside the pocket. He's made some frustrating plays for Tennessee this year. And that Ohio State front has shown, JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, those guys can get some pressure on you. And I'm curious, too, Damien, to ask you about this. It feels like maybe you could go one of two ways. But coming out of a game that was so embarrassing, the game itself, the aftermath of that game, is it a sort of guarantee that, you're going to have an angry Ohio State team? Or can it go another way and you look at a team that just looks uninvested despite all that's playing out there? What do you think that looks like from a mental aspect, Damien, in the locker room?
Oh, well, it can absolutely go a different way. And that other way is what we saw against Michigan. Like Ryan Day, this coaching staff, these players, they feel the pressure of what we're talking about. This is the greatest roster that money can assemble. Ryan Day, we've had numerous conversations about him. Now we're starting to have conversations about Chip Kelly, who's known to be an offensive guru almost everywhere he's been. He's starting to call vanilla offenses. He's calling conservative. Ryan Day is coaching conservative. I don't know if the players are taking that direct, energy from the coaches and playing that way, but they're not playing their best. This doesn't look like the most expensive roster in college football. Take coaching out of it. Jeremiah Smith has been great, but the running backs haven't played that well. Will Howard hasn't played all that great. This does not look like what it should on paper. So I think that it can go either one of those two ways. Yes, they can come out and be pissed off, but I think the way that we've seen towards the end of the year, especially that Michigan game, and they've had a lot of time to sit and reflect and sulk in the fact that they let a Big Ten opportunity, a rematch with Oregon, they let that slip through their fingertips. They could be sitting and sulking in that. So it's going to go one of those two ways. I mean, hopefully for their sake, they come out pissed off and just ready to play, get all that negativity, that negative energy off their backs.
I think looking at this game, I want to ask you a quick question, Chris. I think looking at this game, the 47.5 seems a lot. Seems like a lot of points to me. These two defenses.
Yeah, I'm taking the under.
Yeah, the under seems very spicy here. But Chris, what have you made of Ohio State's offensive line and what they can do, in protecting Will Howard and finding something resembling a running game? What can you do with that group?
Not much, apparently, based on what we saw on Saturday. I mean, we'll say this. They lost their center going into the Michigan game. So they had to adapt on the fly. Now you will have had a few weeks of practicing together and trying to figure that out. Maybe that helps a little bit. But to Damien's point as well, I keep coming back to 2 years ago. Ohio State loses to Michigan, shocking loss, but they still make it into the playoff as the number 4 seed. They got another chance. Their biggest goal is still in front of them. And they played a hell of a game against Georgia. And Georgia made a late comeback, and Ohio State misses a field goal at the buzzer on New Year's Eve to lose that game. If they make that field goal, Ryan Day's probably got a national championship because you're playing TCU after that. So in situations where the rare situations where we've said, how can Ohio State respond from the Michigan game? That game turned out to be very well. Now, last year in the Cotton Bowl against Missouri, it was really ugly. They had a bunch of guys opted out, quarterback injury. It wasn't really a fair evaluation. If you're talking full Ohio State in a big postseason game, I keep thinking back to it. Now, that was C.J. Stroud at quarterback. That wasn't Will Howard. But I'm thinking, can Ohio State get past that? The flip side, is it good for Ohio State that this game is at home? I keep wondering, would it be better to get on the road and get away from the tightness that is going to be felt in that stadium?
I believe I brought this up to you, Chris. I brought this up to you. We were talking about going in that that's going to be a weird place for a game.
Dame, have you playing on home versus the road? Can being on the road sometimes be bring you guys together in a different kind of way?
Yeah, because you approach road games a lot differently. You go into road games with a mindset of we're walking into somebody's trap, we taking over their trap. as opposed to, again, being at the shoe where it's going to feel like an anaconda wrapped around them. Like, it's going to feel, if things get kind of hairy to start this game, like, they're going to feel the energy of the fans just get tighter and tighter and tighter. And on the road, you don't have to worry about that. You can just worry about going in, proving people wrong, shutting people up. You look forward to seeing them walk out, middle of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth. So I think playing at home, I don't know that it's the best thing for Ohio State right now. I'm not sure.
And meanwhile, by the way, Ohio State's best games, they lost, but at Oregon, they ran the ball well, and at Penn State, which they won. They did pretty well on the road.
Let's hit some predictions really quick. Dame, what do you like in this one?
This is, I'm going back and forth. I think it's going to be which team can establish the run better. I would have more confidence in Dylan Sampson and Tennessee, especially, like I said, if these receivers can go in and block. And if Nico can make enough plays with his legs, which we know he's capable of doing, doesn't turn the ball over, I think they can edge out Ohio State on the road, in the shoe, put all the pressure on Ryan Day, because essentially they're playing with less pressure going into this. Like, I know we're talking about this is one of the biggest games that Tennessee has been in a really long time. But essentially, like you said, they didn't have to do anything magical to get here. They didn't play particularly well against the good teams on their schedule. They won some, they lost some. But at the end of the day, like, they didn't do anything magical to get here. They didn't have to do anything crazy. So we know what Ohio State is walking into, especially playing at home. So I think with the pressure being on Ohio State, with the way that they've played recently, again, all the things I just said about Tennessee, I believe that run game can get going better than Quinshawn and Travion. I'm going to go with Tennessee in this game. But I definitely am taking the under, for sure.
Yeah, the under for sure. Chris, what do you like?
Going with Ohio State. I think I still believe in this team. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do. And Tennessee's offensive struggles, especially in the first half, can keep Ohio State hanging around. I think this comes down to a field goal, an Ohio State field goal at the end, just like the Sugar Bowl against Georgia, just like the kicks they missed against Michigan, and Ohio State actually makes it this time and wins.
Here's the issue with Ohio State is, would we agree generally that quarterback and offensive line are the two worst positions on Ohio State's team? I'm not sure you could pick two worst positions to be your weakest positions. And Tennessee has the better quarterback, and my wife gets very annoyed when I talk about vibes. This might be the biggest vibes mismatch of the entire season. Like, Tennessee, people are very happy. They're in the playoff, for the first time. They're very excited. They're playing with a bunch of house money because you got Nico coming back. You got all these pieces, and it's like, hey, we got nothing to lose. We're going on the road. We're an underdog. Meanwhile, you got the tightest buttholes this side of the Mississippi over here in Columbus. Tennessee wins this game outright. It's ugly. I think Tennessee wins this like 20-17, something like that. Tennessee wins the game. Might come down to a kick. Might come down to a missed kick, but I like Tennessee to win this game in Columbus.